right, we are making vegan brunch recipes in this video. These are breakfast favorites that are completely veganized, very family friendly, very easy to make and easy to share, but also good for meal prep if you're going to be making them for yourself. I really hope you love both the sweet and the savory brunch recipes in this video. Thank you to Our Place for teaming up with me, and let's go ahead and jump right into my completely eggless chai spiced French toast. So we're going to start by making a little spice blend. It's going to make the French toast taste so delicious, and it's really quick to throw together. Just mix cinnamon, cardamom, ground ginger, a bit of kosher salt, and allspice. All of the measurements in every recipe that you see in this video is going to be in the description box below, but mix that together and set it aside. Then we're going to make the French toast batter. You're just going to take a large bowl and add some cornstarch and a little splash of your soy milk. I like to do this first just to make sure that I dissolve the cornstarch completely and there's no lumps in the batter. Then add the remaining milk and whisk that all together. Next, I'm going to add some orange zest. This really adds so much flavor to the French toast, and whenever I'm zesting, I like to flip over the zester because that's where you'll get a lot more zest. The orange and the orange juice that I add to this batter really brings out the flavor in the spice blend that we made, and vanilla and orange is just a match made in heaven. Now this might seem strange, but I'm going to add some nutritional yeast and baking powder. This is going to create a custardy, kind of fluffy batter that mimics what eggs and dairy would do if you were using animal-based ingredients. Then I'm going to add some vegan butter to the pan and soak my slices of bread. I'm using a light multigrain, but you can use any kind of bread you like. I like either doing white or a light multigrain that doesn't have too much flavor on its own. You want to soak it on both sides. I like to kind of toss it a couple times to make sure that even like the edges and the crust are nice and coated in the batter, and then put it in your cast iron pan. Now you want to make sure that you don't disturb this, don't touch it. Like, this really is the trick. You don't want to touch it until it almost releases itself. Like, you need to give it time to set up a nice crust, get some leoparding, get some brown spots on the bottom so that it has that nice flavor and that, you know, kind of trademark French toast look. And when I go to flip, I'm more scraping the bottom of the pan than lifting up the bread. And that really is a small distinction that kind of makes all the difference when you're flipping. And when I pick it up, I like to kind of swirl to make sure that I get an even amount of butter all the way on the pan, and that way when I flip it back over, it's not going to be a dry spot in the middle. You'll see that when I use just butter, you get kind of random leoparding, like some bits like this have a little bit more, some will have a little bit less. Honestly, I think that's totally fine. What we're looking for is like a crispy crust and lots of flavor, but here you'll see there's a little bit more of an even crust and like a lacy kind of coating, and that's because I did a little bit of vegan butter and a little bit of spray, like cooking spray, and I think that combo really does create a more even browning. So if aesthetically that's what you're looking for, that would be a good combo to try. You can kind of experiment. Making French toast is actually pretty simple. It's just really soaking old bread in some flavored milk and grilling it up in a pan. Every single piece you make is going to look a little bit different, and the trick is really just to let it set up on the griddle so that you get that nice brown crust before you flip it. I love to top this with some powdered sugar and a little bit more orange. The combo of the vegan butter with the crispy bread, those crispy edges are so good with the maple syrup, and you can really taste the cinnamon and the allspice and the ground ginger. It's just such a warming and delicious combo, and it's like a little bit crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, and it's just heaven. Maple and orange and vanilla, you really can't go wrong. You can use any skillet you like when making these brunch recipes, but I'm using a cast iron pan, and I wanted to share some cast iron tips because I know that when cooking with cast iron, it can be a little bit intimidating. I've had issues with sticking in the past, but once you kind of learn a couple of basics, and it's funny because it's stuff my grandma taught me growing up that were just sort of like intuitive to her and how she cooks, that I didn't really realize until I practiced later on and learned myself and realized like, oh, grandma was right. So I'm going to share some tips that my grandma taught me and that I've kind of learned through experience that you can use for these recipes or anytime you're cooking in cast iron. In this video, I'm using the cast iron always pan from Our Place. It's brand new, and so this portion of the video is brought to you by Our Place. And the first thing you want to keep in mind when using a cast iron pan is that it does need to preheat, just like an oven. You don't want to just put the stove on and then immediately put the food into a cold or almost warm pan. You really do want to give it a second to come to temperature. And what's great about cast iron is that once it's at the proper temperature, it holds heat really nicely. So what I do is I put my oil in the pan and I bring it up to temperature with the pan. You don't want to like put the pan on, turn it on, and then put oil in it once it's hot because that will splatter. What you want to do is bring that up together. Once the pan and the oil is hot, then you add your food. And the reason you do that is because that that's going to create that initial sear. As soon as you place the food down onto the hot pan, you're going to get that sizzle, and that's going to immediately start to create that caramelization and that crust that we're looking for. Which brings me to my second tip, which is to not touch it. You don't want to move it around too much. So make sure your heat is about medium. That usually works for most things, and just let it sit. Let that crust develop. Let all of that bottom layer just kind of caramelize, and it will release itself from the pan when it's ready, once that crust has formed. So you don't want to flip it until that point. You'll know it's at that point once you kind of like lift the edge a little bit, like I did with the French toast, and you'll see that it kind of comes up the way it wants to, and you won't have any sticking. The other thing that's really important here is to not have too high of heat. And I can hear my grandma's voice in my head. She would always say two things to me when I was cooking at home growing up. She's like, you don't have enough butter in the pan and you have too high heat. Those were always the things I was doing wrong, and I couldn't understand why her food always turned out so well and she never had sticking and she never had stuff fall apart in the pan. It was because she knew that you don't need to have really high heat to cook the food. In fact, having really high heat doesn't make more of a sear. Keep the heat on about medium. You don't have to be scared of heat. It doesn't have to be like super low, but it also doesn't want to be super high. Like medium is generally good. And then don't touch it. Let it create that crust. Make sure you have enough oil in the pan and you won't have any issues with sticking. This pan has a cast iron interior and a glossy enamel exterior, so it's super easy to clean, and it comes in a bunch of pretty colors. I have it in the color Spice, which matches my other Our Place cookware and my bowls and my plates and a lot of stuff. It looks really pretty because it all kind of matches, and I love how cohesive that is. I think it looks pretty elegant. Other thing you want to keep in mind is care. Care is very important for your cookware, especially if you're going to be investing in something that is well made. You want to take good care of it, and something that is important with cast iron is to keep it dry. I also like to make sure that I'm not stacking other things on top of it so that I don't scratch any of my, that goes for all of my pans, especially my non-stick. I don't use metal. I don't use very high heat. I don't put any of my pots or pans in the dishwasher, which is very important. And I like to let them cool down completely and then wash them with some soapy water and dry them completely. And this one comes with a glass lid, so you can see what's going on in the pan without having to lift off the lid and let all the heat out, which is great for maintaining that temperature. It comes with a beechwood spatula that nests perfectly on the handle and these very cute silicone hot grip. So this one goes on the handle, this one goes on the shorter handle, and it makes it really easy to maneuver on the stove or in the oven. This is oven safe as well, which is great. So I often take this straight from the oven, put it right on the center of the table, and serve food family style. And I feel like it's relaxed and casual, but also feels very elevated because it's a beautiful pan. So if you guys want to try the new cast iron always pan, click the link in the description box below. I hope these tips were helpful for you. If you have any questions about cooking with cast iron, let me know in the comments, and let's move on to our savory hash brown skillet. This hash brown skillet is a showstopper. It's a big crowd pleaser. It's colorful, it's filling and hearty, and it's great to make for vegans or non-vegans alike. I'm gonna start by adding a little oil to my cast iron and tossing some mushrooms around. I just kind of toss them to coat in the oil, and then you wanna spread it out in a thin layer and don't touch it. You wanna let this cook for about 3 to 5 minutes so that you can really give the mushrooms enough time to brown. This will bring out their flavor and really improve the texture. Then I'm gonna add some chopped scallion. I reserve about 2 tablespoons of the green part on top because I'm gonna add that later on, but everything else goes into the pan. Then I'm gonna add a green vegetable of choice. I went for zucchini, but you could do green pepper or broccoli florets, and also some tomato. Now I really wanted to keep things simple, so I'm just gonna season with salt and pepper, but this is where you can really get creative and you can do whatever you like. So if you wanted to add paprika or garlic, Italian herbs, whatever spice blends you like, you could really add a lot of flavor here. Then comes the hash browns. I'm gonna use 1 bag of frozen hash browns. Again, all of the measurements and everything you need to know, lots of detail in the recipe that's linked below in the blog post, so you can easily follow along to make this at home. But basically, you're just going to add this to the pan and toss it with all of the veggies and spices that we added first. So this is going to get nice and incorporated and mixed. I'm gonna let this cook for a few minutes, and in the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and shred my cheese. Now you can totally save time and buy pre-shredded vegan cheese, but as I've mentioned in other videos, if you do that, you won't have as melty of cheese, because when you buy pre-shredded cheese, there's an anti-caking agent on it, so it doesn't like clump up in the bag, and that prevents it from melting a little bit. So if you want really gooey, melty vegan cheese, I highly recommend getting this block of cheese and just kind of grating it yourself. It really does help to improve the texture, and it's a really tasty vegan cheddar that I think works really well in this recipe. So I'm going to sprinkle this on top of the potatoes, and then there's a couple of different options for the egg. I went for just egg on this day, and it
works really well. I totally recommend it. But if you want to do a tofu-based version of this recipe, I will link an alternative recipe in the description box below. But once you add that in, you're going to swirl the pan around just to make sure that it's evenly distributed. And then I very lightly kind of need like pat everything down. You don't want to press it down and make it really compact because that will make it kind of mushy. You really just want to sort of like tuck in all of the toppings and the cheese and make sure everything is totally coated. That will also help with the meltiness of the cheese. Then I'm going to add some tomatoes on top. This is totally optional, but I love to reserve about a tablespoon of the chopped tomatoes just to put on top. It ends up looking so pretty when this comes out of the oven because I also sprinkle on some of those reserved green onions, and that pop of color really is just so beautiful. And you can really smell the crispy potatoes, the seasoned veggies, and those cheesy vegan eggs. It all just comes together and it smells like brunch heaven. I really like to let this sit for like 5 or 10 minutes before I slice into it. It's kind of a game changer. And honestly, anytime you take anything out of the oven, it needs to rest. I know that's so obvious sounding, but I was always so impatient, whether I was making lasagna or chocolate chip cookies or something like this. I always would dig in right away and it would fall apart. And I was like, what did I do wrong? Honestly, just letting it sit and mellow for a second makes it so much easier to slice. And you guys, this is so hearty and satisfying. I really think whether you make this for a vegan or a non-vegan, they are going to flip over it. It's a brunch must, and I hope you love it.
I would love to know which one of these brunch recipes you're going to try first, so let me know in the comments. You should also know that they work really well together, so if you want to make a big brunch and have something sweet and something savory, this would be great. You could just put out some juice and some coffee, maybe some fresh fruit, and you would have an epic vegan brunch. I really hope that you guys enjoy it. Give this video a thumbs up if you did enjoy it, and share the link with someone who is also a brunch lover who also might enjoy these recipes. Click the link in the description box below to check out our place, and I will see you in a video very soon. Bye!